Okay, so for the literature review, there have been I make here three cluster of literature about human right in general, about religious freedom, and about indigenous religion. So on the one hand, the discourse of human rights, the discourse of religious freedom, have been to the direction of examining the universality of human rights and religious freedom toward the pluralities of human beings, including the indigenous. And some of them have come to the conclusion that religious freedom, the universality of religious freedom, or the universality of human rights is an impossibility. And but also there are those who argue that religious freedom, for example, is indispensable in the whole body of human rights. Human rights also indispensable uh, for human beings. And in the discourse of indigenous religion, the literature have uh, been going to the direction of discussing the exclusion of the indigenous from religion discourse, and how the indigenous have tried to engage the religious freedom discourse. But there is this still uh, just a few literature talking about this. So here the research gap that I want to fill is that how to engage this both discourse, the discourse of religious freedom and indigenous religion, how religious freedom can be inclusive for the indigenous. And it is to finally propose then to contribute in this scholarly work how religious freedom could inclusively engage and be engaged by the pluralities of human beings, including the indigenous. And for the theoretical framework about religious freedom, firstly, I refer to Elizabeth Chapman Hurt, arguing religious freedom as problematic because it only accommodates religion as constructed by the scholars and by the state or the government, and it excludes religion as it is lived, or what she called lived religion. And this exclusion reflects the dominant paradigm of religion that's exclusive and too narrow. And but then should we abandon religious freedom? Here I take the position following the argumentation of Heiner Bielefeld, arguing that religious freedom, yes, it is problematic, but it is indispensable in the whole body of human rights because it deals with something existentially significant for human beings. So it is indispensable. So while problematic but indispensable, the very important point here is that religious freedom is also unfinished, meaning that it is not final, it is not fixed, there is still possibility for reconstruction. And because the problem here is that religious freedom has been exclusive for many, including the indigenous, then the reconstruction is to include the excluded, which is the lived religion. And to recognize the lived religion, to recognize the unrecognized, it is here I choose indigenous religion paradigm. And so there is a shifting paradigm here from the narrow, exclusive, problematic paradigm of religion to the indigenous religion paradigm that is more inclusive in encompassing the complexities of religion and the pluralities of religion. Research method here, I use a qualitative research, analyzing various literature, policies, report, international treaties, national regulation, and so on and so forth, related to the discourse of religious freedom in indigenous religion. So firstly, to examine how indigenous religion are excluded from religious freedom discourse, I will take into account the experience of America and Indonesia, by which we could see how the indigenous have been profanized under some categories, and then to examine how the development of the discourse now. I would in that part raise some legal and discursive advancement in the recognition of the indigenous religion, which then would be considered as the potential to develop a more inclusive religious freedom. And finally, to develop a more inclusive religious freedom, I will try to identify some remaining challenges of religious freedom and then some potential to uh, to develop a more inclusive religious freedom. So here is the outline here. I think I could just continue. So start with the chapter 2, entitled Impossible or Unfinished Religious Freedom. I try to scrutinize how indigenous American has engaged the discourse of religious freedom. And for Native Americans and most of the indigenous people, they have no one word for religion. So it is not that they have no word for religion. Here I quote one of the quotation of the indigenous leader in United States, she said that it is not that they have no word for religion, but they have no one word for religion, meaning that religion is for them always interconnected to another dimension of their life. So it is related to their culture, their politics, their environmental practices, and so on and so forth. But religion has been weaponized against the indigenous in United States and Canada because there is a bias of the world religion paradigm, especially Christianity. So in United States, for example, there is a terminology being used, charge statements, referring to the mutually constitutive forces of religion, law, and politics. They try to civilize and Christianize the indigenous because the religion of the indigenous is unrecognized, is considered inferior. And in Canada, there is what Surpsol call as the religious heritage, especially the Christian religious heritage in their constitution, in their founding documents, mentioning about the supremacy of God and so on. And then there are some terminologies, some legal instrument being used by the Native American. First, they argue religion as spirituality, because yes, in the dominant paradigm, religions is very often identified with spirituality. Then they use this argumentation, and its success for the individual cases, especially for the Native American in prison, to protect their individual spiritual practices, but it failed to protect their indigenous land because land is considered a material, not spiritual. And also there are argumentation of religion as culture through some regulation that try to protect what is culturally, historically, and environmentally significant for them, but not religiously. But the problem is still the same with religion, that there is indeterminacy of what could be counted as culture, just as the problem of religion, what could be counted as religion. So the problem is just the same. So in practice, this legal instrument is also still problematic for them. And then they try to engage the language of religious freedom, arguing religion as collective right through, and it ended up with the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. So here they argue religion as religion in the indigenous collective framework, that religion is having a strong emphasis on collective, not only individual like that of the dominant paradigm of religion. However, the problem in practice is that this law, American Indian Religious Freedom Act, still dependent on the federal Indian law in a seemingly paternalistic way. So in practice, it is still difficult for them to access this their religious freedom through this legal instrument. However, to this extent, the indigenous has not only adopted religion, but they have tried to push it, to push the exclusive standard of religion by putting the collective sense of being religious. And then finally, McNally come to the proposal of arguing religion as peoplehood. So peoplehood here referring to the qualities that define a group and inspire individuals to participate in the collective. So it protects the cultural sovereignty of the people through in the name of peoplehood. So the interconnected dimension of the indigenous life is encompassed under the term peoplehood, which McNally prefer to call as it is a form of the kind of the religious sovereignty, not only cultural sovereignty as used to be mentioned. So they have the choice to protect the sacred in the name of religion or in the name of peoplehood. And because again, the federal Indian law still seemingly paternalistic, so McNally tried to integrate this idea of peoplehood to the international norms of UNDRIP, because UNDRIP is considered strongly engaged the cultural sovereignty or the peoplehood of the indigenous people. Although it still neglects religion, it still seems reluctant to directly engage religion. However, with no one word for religion, McNally said that UNDRIP have potentially, at least potentially, extended the narrow sense of religion beyond its conventional meaning, because it puts together the interconnected life dimension of the indigenous. So the conclusion from this chapter is that there are two proposals. It is hybrid control of religious freedom, that the indigenous can protect, can access their religious freedom in the name of or through other legal instrument other than religious freedom instrument. So this is considered as an affirmative strategy for them. But there are another long-term strategy, which is to demand the implication of UNDRIP, because UNDRIP collectivize the sense of human rights in general. So, but UNDRIP still not really engage religious freedom. So McNeely invite to demand the collectivized religious freedom as the implication of UNDRIP. So here, religious freedom is not seen as impossible, but quoting Srupsol, he said that indigenous religious freedom is only currently an impossibility. Going to the chapter 3, I try to see the potential of indigenous religious freedom in Indonesia, from profanization to recognition. The context of religious freedom in Indonesia, we have the protection of religious freedom since the Constitution in 1945. However, the religion governance is heavily informed by the monotheistic bias. So the impact is that in religion definition, for example, we know that in 1952 up to now, in the dominant paradigm, people would say that religion is very often identified with believing in one God, having scripture, having prophet, a system of belief, and so on. So here agama have been in Indonesia have been political tool of exclusion, because so many being excluded, just a few being recognized. And we could see that in the dynamics of recognition in Indonesia, even the religion like Buddhism, Hinduism, they need quite a long time to be recognized as a religion in Indonesia, let alone kepercayaan that the current, the very recent progress is the recognition through the Constitutional Court decision in 2017. So there are three, at least, main problematic feature of religious freedom in Indonesia, which is the emphasis of harmony over freedom. There are limitation of religious freedom based on religious values, which doesn't exist in the international norms, and the old politic of religions of the defamation law, which is certainly problematic and incompatible with the principle of human rights, because it protects religion rather than human beings. To the next part of this chapter, I try to revisit the profanization of the indigenous religion. So in Indonesia, the case is similar with the case of America, that indigenous religion have been profanized under some terminologies other than religion or agama, which is like kepercayaan, kebatinan, adat, culture, spirituality, also local wisdom, and so on. So there is a kind of reluctance to equalize indigenous religions with agama, because agama is arguably because agama has been sacralized, so it is too sacred to be equalized with other than agama. However, despite those terminologies having been problematic, because it profanized the indigenous, but these so-called profane terminologies have been umbrella for the indigenous right protection under various regulation in Indonesia. We could take the example, for example, the term adat have been very useful for the indigenous in Indonesia, because it has constitutional recognition, and it is accommodated under the Ministry of Education and Culture. And very recently, or the most recent progress for the indigenous religion in accessing their right in the name of adat is the Constitutional Court decision in 2012 about hutan adat, which decide that the adat forest or the hutan adat must be perceived as not state forest, but it belongs to the indigenous people collectively. And there is also a very influential, very strong terminologies in Indonesia other than adat, which is kepercayaan. Kepercayaan, I quote Pak Zain here that kepercayaan has a constitutional hook because initially it meant to refer to internal pluralities within religion. So the kepercayaan within agama-agama, aliran di dalam agama-agama. But then in the development, it becomes more established term referring to certain entity other than agama. And now it is accommodated under the Ministry of Education and Culture and under the Directorate of Belief in One and Only God and Indigenous People. And some implication from this accommodation is they have the right to education for penghayat kepercayaan. And also the Constitutional Court decision that I just mentioned is very significant because it states that that kepercayaan is different to agama, but it is equal to agama. So this would then contribute much, I consider, in as will be discussed in the next part. So in practice, actually, the term those who accommodated under the term kepercayaan, adat, and religion, they in practice they are there is a complex intersection among these communities in terms of their elements and in terms of the peoples belong to these terminologies. So to recognize the religion of the indigenous, I try to re-examine the profanization of the indigenous and the sacralization of religion by going back to the genealogy of those terminologies, which I found that all the terminologies are constructed, and because agama, kepercayaan, adat, and so on, they are constructed terminology. It means that they are not fixed, they are not final. It means that they can be reconstructed in order to include the excluded. So using the indigenous religion paradigm here, the teaching and practice of the indigenous people or masyarakat adat, what we call masyarakat adat or penghayat kepercayaan, actually could be reinterpreted as religious. The content of the so-called kepercayaan, adat, local wisdom, and so on are for sure equally religious as that of agama. Uh, and also considering that the people of indigenous religions themselves have convinced since the beginning that their religious institution fully deserve equal state recognition as that of Islam or Christianity. So from the chapter 3, I conclude that other than using various terminologies and legal instruments to protect the religious freedom as an affirmative strategy, as also proposed in the previous chapter about American context, this chapter shows the potential from Indonesian context to advance the discourse with not only the force of international norm like Undri, but with the language of kepercayaan to desacralize religion or agama. Although it is seemingly an unfinished work of equalization, unfinished work of disrupting the sacralization of agama because agama and kepercayaan is still considered different, meaning that they are differentiated. At least Indonesia has not only raised another language of religion as an affirmative choice, but importantly, as a constitutional foundation for transforming our understanding about religion and legal understanding about religion and how to transform the construction of religious freedom. So go to the very short chapter of my thesis. In the chapter 4, I try uh, to develop a more inclusive religious freedom by first identify the remaining challenges of the religious freedom that is still exclusive. The first is the politics of religion, especially as represented in the governance of religion. So there is like a contrast of the inclusive constitution. So there are some regulation, even the constitution have been inclusive actually, but in practice, there is still exclusive practices of governing religion. For example, we could see in the Ministry of Religious Affairs in Indonesia that only accommodate 6 religion, and even the indigenous religion under the terminology kepercayaan being accommodated under the Ministry of Education and Culture, not in the Ministry of Religious Affairs. There is also like program politics of moderation that put more emphasis on the so-called religious harmony that tends to prioritize the dominant religious, although taking into account what they consider local wisdom as potential basis. I'm sorry.
Yes, Mas Umbu.
Sorry. Okay, so next, there is also we could see that how the religious education for penghayat kepercayaan that I mentioned before, it only available up to the high education, but it is still unavailable in college. So the governance of religion to many extents still arguably violates the constitution and human rights principle. And there is also the challenges of the disconnection of religious rights. So due to the sacred profane dichotomy, uh, land, for example, is considered profane matter. That's why the case of indigenous land conflict uh, is not uh, is not counted as violation to religious freedom, because it doesn't make any sense for the dominant paradigm to see land as something religious. And it is not only that land is not religious, but it is separated. It is profane, thus it is separated from the religious matter or the religious discourse, and thus the religious rights. So this actually neglects the intersection of religion with other dimension, uh, and the impact, again, the exclusion. There is two considerable impact here, that it then it leads to the exclusion of the so-called profane. So anything that considered profane, then it is excluded from the religious discourse, including religious freedom. And also another impact is the simplification of religion. Religion has been made too simplistic. It is too narrow, that it is separated, if not isolated, from the other dimension. And in the framework of human rights, we could see this in, like, in the ICCPR, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, in which we could see that religious freedom is in the ICCPR, in the Article 18, for example, um, stipulating that the rights and freedom to have or to adopt a religion or belief, and to manifest the religion or belief in worship, observance, practice, and teaching. So here, we could see that actually matter of manifestation and practice certainly have strong intersection with the economic, social, and cultural rights, which are in the another covenant. Uh, so this is the part of it is separated in the document, but actually, if we try to examine, actually religion it difficult to separate religion from the other dimension. And also, we could then see the indication here that the ICCPR and UNRIP, as have been discussed in the previous chapter, in the chapter 2, that they indicates the narrow understanding of religion that is exclusive and too simplistic, uh, and religious freedom in turn unable to address the complexities of religion as it is lived. And then the last challenges of religious freedom I identified here, the key challenge is that the absence of religion of the indigenous, because it is misrecognized, it is not recognized as religion. It is due to the exclusive and, again, too simplistic conception of religion, so that the indigenous seemingly having no religion. So this is again due to the lack of understanding to explain and recognize the religion of the indigenous that is beyond the conventional one. In Indonesia, I see that maybe we could see this indication in the differentiation of agama and kepercayaan. It indicates that the indigenous religion, kepercayaan, cannot be called religion. So it still should be differentiated, as stated in the Constitutional Court decision. And in human rights framework, here I quote McNally saying that none of any stipulation of religious and even cultural rights in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, ACCPR, and ICESCR is fully entitled to the peoples of the indigenous religion. However, the current discursive and legal discourse at least has put together the complexities of indigenous religion, encompassing the interconnectedness of various life dimensions, as that of the concept of peoplehood, or in the international norms of UNRI. So it has been put together the complexities, the interconnected dimension of the indigenous life, but not in the name of religion. So the work remains to be done is to argue the religion of the indigenous. So I come to the chapter 4 to make a more inclusive. Sorry. So still in the chapter 4, then to develop a more inclusive religious freedom. Firstly, I take a look at the framework of religion making in order to make religion inclusive. So from religion in the making toward inclusive religion. So the very foundation of this argumentation is that religion is discursive. Religion is always in the making, so that there is a possibility to also reconstruct our understanding about religion. And I take the framework of the theory of religion making. There are at least three: religion making from above, of or by the state or by the government; religion making from below or by the peoples itself; and religion making by the scholars, who sometimes provide legitimacy for religion making from above, or sometimes for the religion making from below, but mostly the religion making by the academic, by the scholars, mostly provide legitimacy for the government or for the state, legitimating the exclusion toward the the excluded people like the indigenous. So here I propose the concept of engaged religion making, that try to engage religion making from above and religion making from below. And maybe we could see the concrete case in the context of the Constitutional Court judicial review about the civic administrative law relation to the kepercayaan community, in which it involved the state apparatus, it involved the academic, the scholars, it involved also the people itself. They make the engagement in which they make the what I consider as the engaged religion making that could be more inclusive. So in such framework, it enables a position that goes beyond the conventional meaning of the term religion, that is exclusive and too simplistic. And in human right perspective, the very principle is that religion making must respect any definition of religion, any understanding of religion must respect the pluralities of human beings. And it is important to note that it is human beings themselves who have the determination, who have the authority to decide, to define what is religious for them. So this brings me to the next part about religious freedom, from unfinished religious freedom to inclusive religious freedom. Taking back the question raised by McNally, what religious freedom then can mean? And the very principle here is that to answer the question what religious freedom can mean, it has to keep holding the pluralistic commitment of human rights, meaning that any understanding of religious freedom should be meaningful to the pluralities of human beings. No one should be excluded. And here, inclusive religious freedom, it should be it should be freely articulated, and it should be taking into account the intersectionality of religion and other dimensions. So here, religious freedom should widely open for far beyond any conventional understanding. And the minimum principle here in making claim of religious freedom is the existential significance. I take this phrase from Bielefeld, talking about the indispensability of religious freedom, because it deals with something existentially significant. So I take this as the minimum principle of making claim of religious freedom, the existential significance as freely articulated by the right holders themselves. And here again, to make religious freedom inclusive, meaning that no form of religion should be considered inferior, let alone not religious. So perceiving religion as existentially significant to human beings implies that religious rights and freedom must not be disconnected from other rights that might, in conventional understanding, seem profane, like land, but actually very significant for the existence of the right holder. So what is proposed here, I have to emphasize that what is proposed here by the intersection of religion is that it is not merely the recognition of the intersectionality among freedom and right provision as used to be discussed, like that we cannot violate religious freedom in the name of freedom of expression, for example, or we cannot violate the LGBT rights in the name of religious freedom argumentation. But beyond that, it is the intersection of religion with other dimensions, uh, and those religious rights and other human rights, such as environmental rights. So, like the case of the indigenous, the land should be considered as okay, it is environmental in the conventional understanding, but it is also religiously significant for the existence of the indigenous people. So, when we engage this framework, those framework in the case of the indigenous religion, uh, then in deciding what is the religion, in the effort to recognize the religion of the indigenous, we should taking into account seriously the self-articulation of what is existentially significant and those religious for the indigenous people. It should be handed to the people themselves to decide.
Mas Umbu, you have taken 30 minutes. How many slides do you still have? Probably you have to wrap up now.
Only one slide after this. This is
Yeah.
one last slide.
Okay. Please make it quick.
Okay. So the positioning of, also one important thing here is that other than the self-articulation of the indigenous people themselves is the positioning of religion, again, in the indivisibility and complexity of people's dimensions of life. Since for the indigenous, here I quote again McNally, that culture is not so easily set apart from the other domains. The cultural is also the religious, is also the economic, is also the political, is also the environmental. So the second point I was in engaging religious freedom in indigenous religions is the effort to collectivize religious freedom, but like McNally argued, but I try to push further, not only collectivize but also ecologize religious freedom. So religious freedom should exist not only individually but also collectively and even ecologically, meaning that we religious freedom should be inclusive for the other conception, for example, interpretation of dignity. Okay, inherent dignity of human beings has been the minimum standard of the human rights norms, but the principle of inherent dignity itself should be inclusively open for so diverse interpretation. For example, for the indigenous, their dignity is always it is always in relation to the dignity of nature. For example, it is not only individual dignity but collective dignity as peoples, and also it is ecological dignity, if I could say, because it always in relation to nature, their forest, land, and so on and so forth. And so here ecologization refers also not only in its conventional meaning like in environmental discourse, but ecologization also refers to the importance of taking into account all human rights, including religious freedom, indivisibly. So in the ecology of human rights. So also ecology here refers to the ecology of knowledge because of the particularities taking part in the plural justification and legitimation of religious freedom and human rights in general, including the indigenous ecological paradigm. So what I mean by ecologically engaged religious freedom is the religious freedom that engage to the pluralities of human beings, to the pluralities of paradigm, pluralities of claim of religious freedom, and engage to the whole body of human rights, considering the invisibility of religious freedom and other human rights. And just the last point about kepercayaan, I consider here kepercayaan as a legal basis, legal foundation for an engaged or for an inclusive religious freedom, because religious freedom is legal in nature. So we need also, other than discursive basis, discursive argumentation, academic argumentation, there is legal kepercayaan as legal basis to reconstruct religious freedom, because the Constitutional Court decision in 2017 stipulate that agama or religion should be understood as also included kepercayaan. So it should be having certain implication to the construction of religious freedom by including kepercayaan in the discourse of religion or agama. And this at once disprove the argumentation that religion having no religion. So, and then the last point is that by recognizing the existence of the indigenous religions, it means not only recognizing the religion, but also recognizing and fulfilling, as the court decision themselves also insist, the human rights of those citizens, considering again the indivisibility of religious freedom and other rights. So here I conclude that on the one hand, the development of the discourse of indigenous religion and religious freedom has been to the direction of affirmatively using various legal instruments other than religious freedom to protect the religious, since what is religious for them is always interconnected to other life dimensions, so they have many ways to protect what is religious for them. But on the other hand, there has been legal and discursive potential to reconstruct the understanding of religious freedom beyond its conventional meaning, so that it can be inclusively accessible to the pluralities of human beings, including the indigenous. In this regard, I propose, as I proposed before, as the conceptual framework, engage religion making and engage religious freedom. So that's all from me. Thank you, Fazin, and thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Mas Umbu. Very nice presentation, although it's rather long, and maybe you need to drink some water now to prepare to answer the question. So I propose for the examiners, Arum and Mas Iqbal, maybe 15 minutes each, at most 20 minutes, and then I and Mas Ancho as the supervisors will take each at most 10 minutes. Is that okay, Mas Ancho? Yeah. Okay, Arum, please, you may start your comments.
Thank you, Pak Zain. Good morning, Mas Umbu. Congratulations for completing your thesis writing and coming into the culminations of the whole master program. I am enjoying reading your thesis so much that I have a lot of questions to show how engaged I am with your writing. I hope I can use that 15 minutes, Pak Zain, because I have 5 issues to discuss. But hopefully it can be answered in brief. And excuse me for being a lawyer, Mas Umbu, but my first question will be very legal. Do you think human rights is universal or particular?
I think as a universal norm, it provides the minimum universal standard, but our understanding of those rights in that norms could be diverse.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you. So you differentiate between norms and understanding. What do you mean by norms?
Norms, I mean, I refer to the text, the wording of human rights, like when they say the inherent dignity of human being. Dignity could be interpreted differently by different people with different paradigms.
Okay, so how would you position the binding force and the acceptance level of international or UN declaration? You mentioned earlier UNDRIP. And how about the UN convention or covenant? You mentioned ICCPR. Are they having the same binding force level or not?
Sorry, because you use some legal terms. Maybe
sorry, right. You mentioned UNDRIP, the UN declaration, right, on indigenous. And then you also mentioned ICCPR, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Do you know the different term between declaration and covenant? Are they the same? And how they legally, if you say, binding as norms?
I think they would be legally binding if the country ratified.
Both?
Yeah.
So both are the same. Declaration and covenant, are they the same?
I mean the declaration.
Declaration needs to be ratified?
If I'm not mistaken.
Okay, what about the convention or covenant? Do they need to be ratified?
Yes, I think it is also the same, because if I'm not mistaken, Indonesia have ratified those conventions.
Okay, so you say that normatively it is universal, but the understanding of it might be particular, yes?
Might be diverse, yeah.
Yeah, diverse, so it's particular. what does it mean? Does it mean that each of the indigenous community or even indigenous person, one person might have different idea? I mean, talk about postmodernism.
Yeah.
Do we share different things?
When saying that, actually, I also see like when UNRIP UNRIP actually in McNally words, it collectivizes the understanding of human rights. That human rights is not only individual as it used to be considered, but it could be also a collective, especially in light of the indigenous discourse of or the indigenous paradigm. So it is one example that UDHR is the universal minimum standard of human rights, and then there are some documents like UNRIP that put certain particular or the way they deal with the human rights from certain perspective or certain issue, like the issue of indigenous or the issue of women and so on.
So could one member, one person of the indigenous community share different idea or different understanding or different perspective of religious freedom or human rights compared to the other member of the same group? Or you only see them as a group? Could you repeat? Sorry, I cannot hear your voice.
Could you repeat the first?
Oh yeah. Is it possible that one person, one member of an indigenous community have different perception or different idea, different understanding of human rights compared to the other members of the same community? Let's say if I and you and me, we are the member of Suku Badui, let's say, and then I think religious freedom is X, and you say that religious freedom is Y, and we are still in the same community. Could that be possible?
I think as long as it doesn't violate the other rights and it doesn't trivialize the
okay. If I may clarify again, what do you mean by understanding human rights particularly? You say that the understanding of human rights is particular, right? But the norm is universal. So what do you mean by the particularity of human rights in that sense?
Yeah, because human rights deal with the pluralities of human beings, and I think human being would be so diverse, so huge diverse. So the way they understand, the way they interpret, like certain point of human rights, for example, would be different because they come from different background, different perspective, different experience. And,
okay, thank you, Mas Umbu. Coming to my second questions. That was the first question about your methodological justification. So you say this is a qualitative research, right? And you use documents. I wonder how that is sufficient. I wonder how documents is sufficient to answer your questions of the current discourse. How current is your document or literature?
For example, the discourse of indigenous religious freedom, it is very recent discourse. It just emerged, and it just like 3 or 2 years I take, and it only like from the American context. There are just like 2 books maybe talking about indigenous religious freedom, like or maybe 3 with some years before talking about.
So you see the current discourse of the American native with your literature. You can justify it is fresh from the oven. Yes.
Yeah. According to the year of the publishing.
Okay. And then how long do you think one journal article or one book can be produced? Do you think that there might be a new development? I mean, how can you justify that the use of document and literature is better than a field research when you talk about the current discourse?
Yeah, maybe I think the problem there is in the matter of the term current because how current it is, as you said, but from the what actually I mean, like in my chapter two, what I want to grasp is from the American context is uh, how the experience of the indigenous Americans in engaging with the language of religious freedom and compare it to the experience of the Indonesian. But of course, I aware that there must be uh, maybe more updated development on the discourse.
I was not referring to your second chapter, but I refer to your research question because I'm talking about methodological. Because your first research question is how does the current religious freedom discourse, and I wonder why you choose to use document instead of, let's say, I mean, I'm not asking you to go directly to the US to see how it goes, but we have YouTube's, we have the so-called what is it? Ethnography things, if you ever heard. We can do ethnography, but you know, with this internet thingy, why don't you consider that? Why didn't you consider that? And why do you think that document is better than having such kind of research?
Yeah, because actually, to be honest, in the first I planned this research. I don't have any plan to take any particular look at the American context. For example, I just want to see the discourse of indigenous religious freedom in general, nationally in Indonesia and also globally.
Right. So my question can also be used to explain your current discourse of Indonesian, but you still use document as well. You didn't seem to go anywhere.
I think other than like the legal documents, I also use the literature.
Yeah, document literature, but you didn't go to the field.
Okay.
Why?
Because yeah, in the first when I designed the proposal, I think the resources that I need for the aims, for the purpose of my thesis, I think I can found it on the literature as have been discussed. Like for example, rather than going to do a field research to the certain indigenous community to see directly their experience, I choose to see the how it has been discoursed in the literature, the abstraction, the result of those field research that I taken into. Like from Anju, for example, Anju particular research is on the Amato, but it has been a literature, it has been a theory that I could use in my project of thesis.
So do you think that's sufficient to answer your research question? I mean, you mentioned that Mas Anju's study is about Amatoa, but your studies is the whole country, Indonesia, and even with US as well. Do you think that's sufficient to use, among others, Anju's study to answer your research question?
Yeah, I think of course I cannot go to see when I say Indonesia. Of course, I cannot take a look at all the indigenous communities in Indonesia, but I see the key discourse, the main discourse, the main issue, the key challenges. That's why I always use this.
Okay, thank you. My second sub question of the methodological justification. On what purpose? Yes.
Sorry, just to remind you, it's almost 20 minutes for you.
Sorry, Fazin. On what purpose, or maybe I can skip, but I just give you a note there that your, I mean, I'm just reading it. You don't need to respond to it, Umbu. On what purpose your thesis on what purpose of your thesis that you need to explain the Native American in a dedicated chapter? And if you are comparing, are you using the same indicator for both? Because if we talk about comparison as a research method, then you need to be fair to calculate the indicators, the same indicators for both things that are being compared. So you cannot just compare Indonesia and US, but the examinations of each of the countries using different indicators. That wouldn't be fair. You don't need to respond to that. That's just a note. And then the third point on your first research question, how the discourse exclude. You say your research question, how does the current religious freedom discourse exclude? My question, does it mean that you see the indigenous religion as an object instead of subject that can actively participate in the what you call religion making?
Of course, I see them as subject.
But
They
why
can.
do you think, why do you use the word exclude? To exclude an object, right?
Yeah, what I mean by exclude from the discourse is that they have no place in that discourse.
Did they struggle to get a place there?
Of course.
Mhm.
Of course.
So what exclude them?
The dominant paradigm, the dominant construction of religion.
What do you mean by excluding if they are participating in the discourse?
They have been trying to engage the language of religious freedom, but of course, the access that they have, it's not the same with the major religion.
Right. What do you mean by exclusion?
They cannot use it. They cannot
Is it on the process or on the result?
Result of what? Sorry.
Result of the discourse or in the process?
Okay, I think what I mean is actually the result, like the current construction or the construction of religious freedom.
So they're not being excluded, but maybe they lost in the discourse because you see that as a fight. But they are participating, so they're not being excluded.
I think the access is not the same for them. There is injustice because the
if you see it as in a liberal perspective, but can you compare between the socialist paradigm and the liberalist perspective, where the fight is going on? Is it in the beginning that they have the same introductory level, or at the end result that should be the same? I mean, socialists and liberalists have different way to see that, right? I think I just have one more thing, Fazen, but Ubud
probably it will also be useful if you can give recommendations about how to improve it.
Yes. Yeah. I think well, it's in the form of questions, but Ubud doesn't have to respond. Two things. First one, your second questions, why do you put it on the second questions after questioning or explaining the current discourse in the first question? So in the first question, you questioning current discourse, but then on the second questions, you talk about the development. I think it's better to talk about development first, because development involves historical development as well, and then you see on the current discourse. But I think it's the other way around that you try to use here. So I need to understand why, not to say that that is wrong, of course. And the last point is that, why do you think the whole discourse can learn about American and Indonesian context? Is it best practices or worst practices, or one of them is worst practices, one of them is best practices? And who could and would learn from the two countries? I mean, who will use this study? Or do you think both or one of the practices lack of this, what you call ecological engaged religious freedom? And I mean, the problem that you mentioned in your analysis is all about the subjectivity of the human, lack of education, the ID card, if you mention the constitutional court. But then why do you propose then we need to use this ecological, if the people themselves, this human body, still have problem? Why don't we address to that problem instead of just going into the whole, ecological thingy? That's just my notes. You don't need to respond right now. And thank you for your time. I give it back to Pak Azin. Thank you.
Yeah, Marum, what suggestion for revisions you have? I mean, like you asked about declaration and convention.
Oh, okay. Just
do you have notes?
Yeah. Like no, Pak Zain. My first question was not meant to revise Umbu's thesis, but to check his understanding. So it's about the first question was not meant to be addressed for revision, but my second point on methodological justification, I think you need to strengthen more on why you choose this, instead of just saying that this test is just qualitative, but you need to explain why you choose qualitative with document and so on instead of going to the field. Of course, I may have answer to that. The answer would be, if you go to the field, you have raw materials. But if you use documents, it's already being concluded, wrapped up by previous researcher. So it is valid already. So it will be easier to use that instead of going to the raw materials that you get from the field. So I think one point that I need you to revise is on your methodological, just to strengthen it on justification. So not just methodology, but why you choose to use that. I think that's all, Pak Zain, the revision point.
Yeah, well, probably just a quick explanation. The question about covenant. Covenant is binding when you ratify it. A declaration is not. It doesn't need ratification because, but okay. And then secondly, probably before giving it to Mas Iqbal, are you there? Just a quick question about methodology, Ambu. You mentioned the three types of religion making: from above, from below, and from a pretended outside. What is it that you're doing?
Yeah, I'm talking a bit about that in that part also. That what I try to do is, of course, I'm not trying to taking side to certain part sides like the state, whether the state or the indigenous, because I try to engage the indigenous religion, what has been excluded, but also I try to engage the religious freedom, which could be considered as religion making from above, but I take it into account seriously as a potential tool for inclusion of the indigenous.
Yeah, no, I mean the process of your writing itself. Can you describe it also as religion making?
In certain part in my thesis, I said that I emphasize that like when I propose the conceptual framework of engaged religion making and engaged religion, or when I propose existential significance as the minimum standard of making a claim of religious freedom, it is not to put certain essential definition of religion or religious freedom, but it is to put again the minimum standard of claim, just as what human rights did.
Well, yeah, well, you may consider this, but I think I can see your thesis writing as religion making from a pretended outside, and that can side with the above, the governed religion. It may also work with the lived religion. So if that becomes a methodological point, then I think that answers Mbak Arum's question about the material of your work, which is literature, current literature, etc., in Indonesia, in America, etc. But yeah, maybe just consider it. We can pursue it again later. Mas Iqbal, please.
All right. Thank you, Zainal and Mas Umbu. Congratulations for completing this draft. I think this is an excellent draft, and I think it is very well written and very strong in what you are arguing in this thesis, and easy to read. And I think this is a very well written thesis. So congratulations, Mas Umbu. And yeah, I don't have much question, and I think some of my question has been raised by Mbak Arum. I just want to start with your title, and this is for me is a very long title and takes time to understand it. Yeah, from profanizations to the art of weaving and ecologically engaged religious freedoms. Yeah. First of all, I think, what do you mean by profanizations, and where do you explain about profanization, Mas Umbu?
What I mean by profanization is the way the indigenous the religion of the indigenous has been misrecognized. When the language of religion come to them, then it comes at once with the stigmatization that they have. What they have is not religion. Here we bring the religion.
The way religion has been used in what way? The way religion has been discussed, has been used, and in what way? What way do you mean here?
Like when the indigenous religion being framed or being called as adat, culture, even spirituality, local wisdom, and so on. While what they have is actually for me equal to what agama or religion have. So in that way, they have been
so it's not recognized as equal as agama, but does it necessarily mean profanized? Profanized profanized has its own meaning, right? It's not about whether it's not about equality. Profane, sacred, it's profane is the opposite of sacred. Do you think do you see the the evidence that there is a view that considers adat or indigenous practices as profanized? In what way is it profanized?
Like in Indonesia, I think it is very tangible that while there are policies some years ago about culturizing, membudayakan kepercayaan, emphasizing that indigenous religion or kepercayaan is not agama, they are budaya. And in the 1918, the penghayat kepercayaan are directed to embrace one of the official religions. And also in my cases, in the background, the problem in my thesis is that how the indigenous land conflict are not counted as case of violation to religious freedom, because land is not religious, land is profane. But for the indigenous, land is
so the categorizations of indigenous religions as kebudayaan, it is the profanizations of indigenous religions. That's what you're suggesting. Yeah. Did you put somewhere in your writing that's suggestion, that's clarifications?
To mention it like directly, it is in chapter 3 and also in chapter 4, I think. But I think the explanation of the chapter 2 is also represent the profanization.
Maybe I don't read it carefully, but I don't have much time to read your thesis, so I don't find that. I don't find where you define profanizations or clarify what you mean by profanization. I think your answer is helpful. Your oral answer, what you just said, but I think it is better to be put in your somewhere in your writing, because this should be central, because this is in the title of your thesis. So that's my first comment. My second is it's actually related to what has been raised by Mbak Arum. When you're suggesting that the current discourse on religious freedom exclude indigenous religions, do you that what is the basis of that claim? I mean, does the norms of religious freedoms specifically mentions 5 religions, world religions, and then exclude specific religions? Where is the exclusions based?
First, that it could be seen like in cases like I mentioned in the very first beginning of the chapter of introduction, from the data of the complaint of freedom of religion or belief in Indonesia from 2017 to 2019, there are no cases of the indigenous in relation to religious freedom. Religious freedom is always related to blasphemy, to freedom of worship, house of worship, and so on. And also in some regulation, like in the ICCPR, it mentioned like seemingly it seems like it is inclusive, because it says that it accommodate all form of religiosity, but it doesn't engage the indigenous, as McNally
so
also.
ICCPR as a norm textually Does it specifically exclude indigenous religion? Or those who are referring to those who, I mean, I think it is important to differentiate between the concepts and the applications of that concept, of that norms. Yeah. It's like you said, it seems like for me, you're suggesting like those who create ICCPR specifically aims to exclude indigenous religions. Because if you look at the text itself, I'm not sure it is meant to do that.
Yeah, maybe it doesn't mean to do that, but in fact, indigenous religion is not there. That's what I see.
You expect the indigenous religion to be put specifically in the ICCPR?
No, but the features of religion being mentioned there have a certain bias to the word religion paradigm.
Like what? The features like what?
Like it is about belief, it is about worship. Worship is very, the term worship is very word religion paradigm.
So what is indigenous religions? So you means if not worship, so what?
Yeah, in the case of the indigenous, for example, it's very often when the indigenous people go to the forest, they say, oh, they worship the forest, and that's the source of stigmatization because the very dominant or the very major terminology being used in the word religion paradigm is worship. When you go to the forest, when you go to the tree, the stone, you are worship those things. But in the indigenous religion paradigm, they have no word for worship. It is not worship. It is just the interrelation between them as human beings. With
yeah, I'm not sure how that can be included, yeah, in the norms like ICCPR, because that's, I mean, it's very particular. I mean, if you would like to create this kind of a universal standards of human right, you have to find something that is inclusive in that sense. But this bring me to the third questions, Mas Umbu. I think and I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a legal scholar. I've studied religious studies and more related to the political science studies. And I mean, yeah, your argument is that indigenous religions is not excluded here, especially with related to their claims of land and forest as part of their spirituality. Claim of land, claim of right, claim of right of land and forest. This is dangerous to me because I mean, if you recognize the claim of land, the claim of forest, etc., to specific cultural or religious communities, in many cases, actually, that is very problematic. There are many, this is many states that is now having problems because of this sense of ethno-religious nationalism. And this ethno-religious nationalism originated on the claim of land as sacred, as their ancestral land, as their religious land, holy land. And that is cultural claim, that is a spiritual claim. And if you put it into a legal document, it will be problematic. Because how do you define the land? How do you define the border of the land? And if you claim you have the right to that lands and you demand recognitions, who will define? I mean, what about internal claim within the community itself? What kind of recognition is possible in the context?
So I also discussed a bit about that in my thesis. That of course, when saying that the claim of religious freedom should be based on the religion making from below, let's say how the human beings like the indigenous define what is religious for them, and they have the argumentation that land is religious for them. When they could bring it to the court and claim for their rights, as long as it doesn't violate the other human rights. Or
what is the basis of the claim? What will be the basis of the claim? This is our land. This is our ancestral land. This is our sacred lands, our sacred forest. What will be the basis of the claim?
Of course, they have to. The argumentation, of course, would not be that easy. It is heard like anyone just could claim their land and just claim their certain land as their, and then have like the right to veto any like even the state interest, because of course they have to provide their argumentation, their evidence of their interrelation with that land, as when they claim that as certain land as their indigenous land. Of course they should have their argumentation, their evidence, because in the current, what I said as the current discourse, even when they have the argumentation, even when they have the explanation of how certain land is religiously significant for them, the court doesn't want to take it into account, because again, in the dominant paradigm of religion, it doesn't make any sense that land could be that religiously significant for people.
Yeah, that's understandable, but I'm worried. Yeah, I'm concerned that what you're proposing is will make it more impossible. You know, religious freedom is to some people is already impossible, but to propose this kind of differentiated freedoms of indigenous religions will make it more impossible.
Maybe if I could clarify that here, and if I'm not mistaken, in my last chapter, I clarify there, when I say indigenous religious freedom, I doesn't expect certain particular provision of indigenous religious freedom, like UNRI, for example. No, it is just to open, to broaden the scope of religious freedom, the scope of religion, so that when there are claims like from the indigenous, it could be counted as religious claim. So it doesn't to take a certain particular essential definition, essential standard of what is religious for the indigenous on certain human rights norm, for example.
Yeah. All right. Well, and that's for just for our our intellectuals exercise in my sense, because I mean this is one issue. I think sometimes it is interesting to discuss at the academic level, but sometimes when we try to to put it into the more practical level, and especially when it is connected to the government aspect, I think there will be more complications in that sometimes we do not expect that, because we miss that we miss that aspect. And especially I have been concerned with this call for the recognitions of right of land, sacred land, etc., because in many cases actually there are so many problems because of the claim of sacred lands by specific people, specific entities of people, that this is their land, this is the ancestral land, and that's become an issue in there. So I think we need to be more careful, more careful with that. My last question is more of the methodology, Mas Umbu, and I think Mbak Arum raised questions. I think it's because you mentioned about that your method is qualitative, but what you're doing is just, I think, is a literature studies in this case. So because you're not doing field work, or you're not doing interview, etc., and I think I would expect that by a current discourse, you would be more specific in that, yeah. Because if you mentioned about current discourse, you referring to privat, etc., hood, etc., and they are also this part of the discourse also, I think. So whose discourse is in this case? I think it need to be more specific in your methodology. So yeah, maybe in the chapter 1, maybe you can clarify on the questions, Mas Umbu, on methodology aspects, sections of your chapter 1's method, chapter 1's part. Yeah. All right, I think that's all from me, Pak Zainal, and I think since this has taken a long time, yeah, because Mas Umbu was given 15 minutes, but he took 45 minutes, and that I think is irrespectful of the other right of times. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you so much,
Mas Iqbal. Thank you for the comments, and please don't forget to fill in the forms, and then you can send it to Mbak Lina. So I have a few comments, but also I think it's important to speak a little about the supervisor's point of view, because I also contribute to some extent to this. But first of all, I think it becomes clear. I mean, certain things need more explanation. I was thinking you don't have to answer it now, but probably while I'm speaking, you can think about it. If you have to say your thesis in a few words, using non-technical terms, how would you say it? I mean, to someone not from CRCS, who doesn't know what is world religion paradigm, doesn't even know what is indigenous paradigm, etc. Let's say someone from agriculture, having no background in law or religious studies, and then he or she asks you, what is your thesis about? If you give him or her the title Provenization in 4 lines, they will be more confused than understanding what are you writing about. If you have to say it in, let's say, 1 sentence or two sentences in everyday language, what is it about? Can you say it? What is your main argument? Or maybe you can think later. But from first of all, my suggestion is especially in chapter 2. I think you are citing too much probably on McNally, where there are a few central literature, including Tissa Wenger, etc. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Tissa Wenger is more pessimistic than McNally. So I was thinking it would be helpful actually if you also map the literature. I mean, like in the case of the US, in America, in Canada, who is where. I mean, if there's the optimist, pessimistic view in terms of incorporating indigenous religion into the discourse of freedom of religion, where does Tissa Wenger stands? Where does McNally stands? So just to give a more contour of the literature, so that it's just not flat, you quote here and there, but there are also differences among them. So that's my first suggestion. And then secondly, so this is one response from the supervisor, which you may include in your, if you agree. But to respond to Mas Iqbal's question, what does it mean to make religious freedom more inclusive? So one of, I think an important thing here is to include the idea of power. So religious freedom is inclusive enough. It's not limited to 5 religion or 6 religion or 7, 8. But in that sense, it's inclusive, but it is not inclusive of certain other types of religions. And mostly it's the question of power. The indigenous religion, the indigenous communities did not even exist actually in 1960s. It was not on the map of the maker of Universal Declarations of Human Rights because they don't have power. They were among the colonized. Well, it's interesting, actually, if you read the news, just yesterday, the Pope went to Canada to apologize to the indigenous communities there. It took Vatican so long, I mean, to apologize. Even with this new Pope, which is regarded as progressive, since 10 years ago, probably, he was being questioned. What is the Catholics' standpoint on this? Many of the indigenous people, they were schooled in Canada, schooled. I mean, they were killed, many of them, murdered. Until now, they're still, I mean, mass graveyard are still found. And it took so long, and even he came only after representatives of the indigenous religions went to Vatican asking him to apologize. And even after that, it still takes so many years before he apologized, finally. This is an illustration of the unequal power. Even now, I mean, with the UNDRIP, with the revival of the indigenous communities movement, etc., they still have much less power. They are still weak. So I think that is a point of inclusion. They are excluded because they don't have power. So at some point, probably this is this has to be there. It is also related to Mas Iqbal's question about sacred land. Probably Mas Iqbal is thinking about well, the claim of sacred land in Jerusalem, Palestine, etc. What if one makes that kind of claim? How would you recognize that? It may be dangerous when it becomes some identity politics. So I think that has also to be addressed, because in one way or another, even in Indonesia, there has been ways to recognize tanah adat, for example, the customary land. How do you ascertain that? Well, there are ways, there are instruments. But anyway, it needs to be addressed. And then, yeah. Mas Iqbal's question also, whether your drive to be more inclusive becomes an idea of differentiated religious freedom, which I think it should not. But yeah, I mean, so maybe first of all, the argument showing how current freedom of religion discourse is inclusive. So I think, yeah, I don't have other, oh yeah, one other point about methodology. I think I mentioned earlier, and maybe you need to consider it. Probably this exercise itself in writing the thesis is a kind of religion making from the pretended outside. There is scholarly discourse. And you use scholars' works, etc., to make your point. So I don't know whether that, but I found it attractive to also use that term, even for your own work. I mean, if you follow the book which you refer to by Mander and Gressler, they do have, I mean, speaking about religion making from the outside, which is going more to the above or to the below. So it may be either way. Okay, that's all. Just, I mean, I have no questions. We have had some discussions. I already give you recommendations, etc. So I think I don't have any more. Oh yeah, one other. Okay, well, probably later. I don't want to take more time. So, Mas Ancu, please.
Thank you, Pak Zen. Yeah, me too. I think thank you, Mbak Arum and Mas Iqbal, for asking those questions. I think that would, strengthen the argument. Would be helpful, to strengthen the arguments. From the discussion before, I think what is needed to explain or to make it more concrete in argument is about the difference between the norm, for example, ICCPR, and also the explanation about FOB. I mean, the way I think you see the concept of FOB, what is religious in FOB, the religion making that make the universal norm ICCPR become more restricted because it is involved freedom of religion or belief, or the way religion is governed, religious governance, which include, for example, in Indonesia, the politics of official religions. That is not the norm, but they are what the government are doing. Making religion in such a way must be official, and so come to a certain definitions, for recognitions. And so the religion making, like what religion is and what is not religion, what is cultural, is the one that is basically against the norm. So the norm itself is universal. The ICCPR and also human rights, UDHR, we perceive it to be inclusive, universal, but the way it is governed, the way it is in discourse explained, including the experts, have created difficulties to include indigenous people's religiosity into discussion. And that we would include why, for example, for freedom of religion or belief is still hard to use as a tool, for advocacy, for human dignity, for indigenous people struggling for survival from the land grabbing, for example, which is like the common characteristic of experience of many indigenous peoples in Indonesia and also, in many parts of the world. So I think that is what UMBU may just make it like in concise explanations on which one is exclusive. And I mean, following the arguments that you have written, you basically implicitly argue that it is the religion making, it is the religious governance, it is the folk, the way it is, it is brought into implementation for religious governance. So I think I don't want to have question two. This thesis has already been so sudah sangat luas dan cukup dalam kayak gitu, ada banyak. So if we see the chapters to chapters, it really discusses the very difficult and complicated issues. So I think for me, the ones, this is to respond Mbak Arum and also Mas Iqbal's questions. I think differentiating the norm and also the governance as two different things through which we see which one is inclusive and which one is exclusive. Yeah, I think that is what I want to see, Pak Zen. I mean, for a little no revision, but just to make it more concise. That is only from me, Pak Zen. I thank you, UMBU, for the hard work. I'm thankful to what you have been writing about. Pak Zen, I am giving you back.
Okay. Mas UMBU, have you thought about, how do you explain it in 1 minute? Two sentences. Can you say it even, or probably even better, in Bahasa Indonesia? In plain terms. What is this about?
Mungkin saya akan bilang ketidakadilan terhadap masyarakat adat dan pengait kepercayaan.
Just that?
Ya, sebagai akibat dari cara berpikir yang sudah sering orang bayangkan. Kalau menjelaskan secara sederhana mungkin gitu.
Okay. Well, yeah, at some point you have to explain it in yeah, in plain terms. So it's good. I mean, if you can think about it, I have my own sentences, but I don't have to say it now. But okay, so I think we're done. Do you have other, I mean, responses to my and Pa Anchu's suggestions? Or okay? Anything? Any last words?
I think thank you for, yeah, I'm okay for with all the comments and suggestions. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Zain
Okay.
and all.
Yeah. Well, thank you also. Like Mas Anchu said, thank you for your hard work. I think this is a very original works. Not many people have written about it, especially in Indonesia. And I think probably this is the first in CRCS, I mean, taking up this topic. So hopefully this can also be a good start for other students in the future. Okay, well, I think we're done with the examination. So now we, the examiners, will speak among ourselves. So if you can, all of you can leave the Zoom